Hi everybody and welcome back to our podcast, We Are Selling. My name's Lee Woodward, the author of the Complete Salesperson course. Last week, we had Mr. Chris Hanley start our incredible work on the negotiation process, and we discussed some fantastic points. We discussed in a negotiation, patience is active, not passive. Substance, process and relationships, and negotiation is about education. Well, this week we're going to continue on with our topic on negotiation as Chris Hanley joins me again for part 2 of the program. Chris, welcome back to the program.
Good morning, Lee. How you doing?
Chris, I'm doing well, and thank you for your massive contribution to our podcast, We Are Selling. Today, I want to continue on with this negotiation training that you and I are doing. And as we did last week, I'm just going to throw some points at you, and these points are moments in a negotiation, things we need to know, and they're triggers or snacks of information that make up the study and knowledge of negotiation. And as you mentioned last week, negotiation is about education. But let me get you started on the first point. And point 1 today is going to be, you've got to know who's at the back table. Chris, take us into this.
I just had a very big lesson on that one, Lee, in my own business. I was involved in a very big negotiation in the company, and at the end of the day was under the impression that I was dealing with and negotiating with the correct people, and I wasn't, and neither was my company. And we learned that lesson. And what's it mean? It means that in many instances, you think you're dealing with the right people, only to find out later that it was the father-in-law or the brother. It happens all of the time, and I think it comes back, as nearly everything does, to the listing presentation. Are there any other significant people in your family or in your company who you will be listening to, or who are important to you in this negotiation? And you can ask those questions to gather information. You know, it amazes me after all the years I've been doing it to learn every single day, either through my staff or through things that I'm involved in. And I negotiate not just in real estate, I negotiate in a lot of other areas because of some of the other organisations I'm involved in. And the rules are the same. You know, whether you move from the creative industries, the merchant banking, to all the different areas that I am involved in, the rules are always the same. Make sure you know who's sitting at the back table.
Chris, greed's an issue in a negotiation and sometimes forces error in people's pathway. They don't keep one eye on the future to look at the outcome. And I believe great negotiators can see an outcome. They don't just get lost in the tension of the deal. But I've heard you speak about always be trying to grow the pie.
Yeah, you've got 3 things in there. Visualise the end of an agreement before you start. I've never started an agreement to negotiate on anything without believing and visualising the end with people being happy and the deal's done. So I start there. That's the first thing. Greed is an interesting emotion, both as a principle of a business. If you're greedy, you'll recruit and grow a business that's greedy and never be able to build a great culture. If you're greedy as a real estate agent, as a salesperson, I can tell you that the buyers and sellers will sense that in you. Buyers and sellers know exactly that they're hypersensitive through this process. So if you're greedy and they'll work out that all that you want is to put this together to earn a fee, they will hold back from you. They won't tell you the truth. The oil won't be there. There'll be no trust. And you'll stumble because you won't have all the facts. The third thing that you talked about then was growing the pie. One of the things I did learn at Harvard was this, that the whole idea of win-win is dumb. The whole idea of negotiating, the way we learn or the way we're taught in real estate, has some faults. And one of the faults is we just think every deal, Lee, is about the price, and we're wrong. And that one of the things I particularly found interesting at Harvard was that they said that before you start any deal and then during the deal, what you should always be trying to do is grow the pie. Now, I'll give you an example. In real estate, we often just focus on this price, aspect, and that's all we do. Growing the pie means that there's many other elements to a negotiation. For example, it might be the length of time of the settlement. It might be the inclusions, but it could be a whole pile of different things. So before you start negotiating, you might talk to a seller. For example, the seller might want to stay in the house a few extra months. In our part of the world, that's quite common. Or the seller might want to rent the house back. Now, rather than going straight for the jugular and how much and let's work these things out, you need to grow the pie. And that way someone might make an offer, and the offer, for example, might be lower than the vendor wants at the end of the day, but the buyer has said that the owner can stay there for 12 months and rent it back. Or I'm happy to give the owner a 4-month settlement, for example. Well, in that particular instance, that's a perfect example of growing the pie. Don't close anything off before you start negotiation.
In growing the pie, that's where that other word comes in of concessions. And I think concessions are the final tools sometimes. And as you mentioned, it could be you can stay there for 6 months. You can take the portable building in the backyard, which is your art studio. There's so many things that can be a concession, and it does come under growing the pie. Who is actually in control of your deals becomes an issue for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I'll tell you who's in control of every negotiation. It's the person who cares less about the outcome. What we miss in real estate is often because we don't have the trust we need. The person who's in control, Lee, is the one who will walk away quickest. And that's the person who cares less about the deal. And I think we look at this the wrong way. That's why the person who cares most has the least amount of control in spite of the fact they think they do. Does that make sense?
100% right. I know myself in purchasing, sometimes, if that comes off, great. If not, it's not the end of the world. You have control.
Correct. Totally. And great agents feel it and sense it, and they can relate it to the other side. So if you've got a buyer, I'll give you an example in my market. If they're an investor in my market, they're hard. Any investor along the coast of Australia buying discretionary income, for example, holiday properties, and I've just sold one in my own area as an owner, they have, there's a knowing as an agent in those circumstances that they're buying only if properties are very, very well priced, and they walk. So in that particular instance there, when you're the agent or you're the seller there, that's who's in control of the negotiation, and not someone who, for example, is very keen to sell.
Chris, let's bring into play here a technique called the takeaway. And the takeaway, for an example, for our listener, I may be dealing with you, Chris, you're my vendor. I've got the purchase up to an exceptional level in my mind, but not yours. And this has been going on for a week now, and you feel really confident that this is getting closer. And then I say to you, Chris, I've got to go back to our purchaser this evening, as I said I would. I just now need your consent to sell them another property, as we're not going to use them on yours. And when you ask for consent to sell them something else, you're taking it away from the vendor who got a little bit cocky because everyone wants my property, everyone wants me, everybody wants to buy it, to, I'm just letting you know we've gone as far as you can. With your consent, I'll just move them on to something else. What's your views there?
I agree with it. Taking things away from people is a really good idea. The only rider I would add to that is that a lot of agents, when they do that with the wrong attitude, and the owner picks it up. It's like they're being punished, and the agent's saying, hey, look at me, I've done a great job, you're not going to accept it, so I'm going to take them away. Now, it goes back again, like everything, to the listing presentation. Pretty well everything we'll talk about whenever we talk, Lee, we'll go back to that unbelievable time when you speak to people about the process. If you do that to punish someone, they'll punish you. But if you do it for the right reasons, have I got your permission? Are you okay if you ask it the right way? But only if you've done the following, given them the offer in writing. I can't believe the number of agents who negotiate today who still don't give people offers in writing. Like, hello? Of all of the mistakes you can make in negotiation is to do it all verbally or over telephones. It's crazy. Why? Because if you've got an owner sitting there with a good offer, really good offer, and he or she or they won't accept it, if you print it and give it to them in an envelope and deliver it there or whatever, and it sits on their coffee table, I've seen them screwed up, ripped up, and taped back together again. And I tell you, they're like a silent noise day in and day out. You leave them there for a day or two and they work. But if you've tried everything, Lee, and you can't get the deal together, including going back face-to-face one more time, and yes, you can't get it together, then sure, taking it away from them is a good idea, getting their permission is a good idea. And it works in some instances.
And so important, just in something you said then, you can strengthen a negotiation with your detailed documentation, which might have a heartfelt letter at the beginning of how you feel and what's happened. Then it might have 14 pages of purchaser inspections and comments. It may have the withdrawn interest from the 5 interested parties we've had have all bought somewhere else, and this is what they bought, and this is where we are, and I care for you. And this connects to something you've trained for many years, Chris, which is the best negotiators must do the emotional labour to hold the deal together. And your documentation can be a reflection of the sweat you've put into a deal versus just presenting a quick verbal offer.
Yeah, that's correct. Emotional labour is toil, T-O-I-L. It's a form of work, and work's a doing word. We think that selling a house is some stylish marketing, followed by a bunch of interests, followed by the delivery of offers and so on, all of which is a little bit passive rather than active for me. You've still got to sweat. Negotiating is one of the 4 points, Lee, the 4 aspects, the 4 components of successful real estate. PLAN, prospect, list, adjust, negotiate. It's the 4th one. Now, you can't do it without raising a sweat. It involves pushing, shoving, active listening. It involves a whole pile of activities, forms of toil that mean you'll have to do things actively rather than wait. And I'll just go back to something we talked about before we came on air. Many real estate agents want to be professionals. Many real estate agents really strive to be viewed that way, but they don't understand that in order to be a great agent, you have to be not a surface agent. You have to be an agent who goes deeply underneath all of these different topics, who goes and learns to negotiate, for example, as other great professionals do in other professions. So you can't, being a surface agent means that you don't understand emotional labour. It means that you just think it's a little bit of pushing and shoving. It's not. It's a lot deeper than that, and it involves basically toil on a number of different levels to create a deal in the first place and then hold on to it and keep it together.
Chris, there's 3 types of people. Explain that to us.
There's 3 different types of personalities, and this is the buyers and the seller and the agent. And when you are involved in negotiations every day, you've got to recognise pretty well instantly the 3 personality types. There's avoiders, there's accommodators, and there's competitors. Avoiders, accommodators, and competitors. Now, people don't understand the definition of each of the 3. It is important for this conversation, Lee, that they don't need to. An avoider, though, simply is exactly as it says, someone who runs away from confrontation. Lovely people, and there's many agents who are avoiders, and in my business, we did this exercise a couple of weeks ago at a sales meeting, and there was a number of people in my business, in my sales team, who are avoiders. There's nothing wrong with it. You've just got to be aware that you're an avoider. Then there's accommodators. Accommodators are people that try and make everybody happy. I'm actually an accommodator. And then there's some people, God bless them, and the industry's full of them, they're called competitors. Now, when you're negotiating a deal, you've got to know what the buyer is, you've got to know what the seller is, and more importantly, you've got to know what you are. If you know those 3 things and who's what in the mix, in the pot, then you'll be a better negotiator because you know how to deal with each of the three personality types.
Expand further on the competitor.
The competitor is someone who often is the worst person in the mix. And if the agent's a competitor, they can sometimes get the wires crossed in the process. They tend to put the two people up against each other, the buyer and the seller. But it's really not about that. And as I said to you earlier, it shouldn't be win-win. You know, a competitor will try and get win-win when the buyer and the seller don't necessarily need win-win. You know, competitors also in there for his or herself sometimes. You know, they might want to get the highest price ever in the history of a suburb of the street, but that isn't always the best way to do it. So, you know, competitive people are fantastic, and all great agents are competitively. Don't get me wrong. All great agents, every single one I've ever met, and my office is full of competitive agents, really full of competitive agents. But they're not all competitors when it comes to negotiation. Many of them are accommodators, for example, or avoiders.
What's the mirror image rule?
Mirror image rule is very important, and it's something that all new salesmen should be told when they start in business. The mirror image rule is to make sure the deal you put together with the buyer is exactly the same one as the seller thinks he or she is about to sign up for. And what happens, and it goes back to what you mentioned before, if there's 5 points in the deal, you need to write them down, you need to go through the 5 points with each side, but you need to ask a question. What do you understand? You say this to the buyer and say it to the seller after you've written all the things down to make sure you've got a mirror image deal. When you say to someone, what do you understand by these 5 things, and go through them point by point, what you're doing is active listening, and you're waiting to hear whether, even though the words are written down and seem clear, whether they're hearing the same thing. For example, if you say to someone it's subject to something, well, they mightn't understand what that means, right? That it's subject to a pest and build, subject to a clean pest and build, subject to a pest and build without the need to spend money. All of the points in there have to be explained, and you have to ask people and actively listen to the following thing, what they understand the different points to mean. That's why you've got to match up. So a mirror image deal means that the buyer's offer and the seller's acceptance need to be exactly the same, so you don't have that thing where, you know, in the second week, for example, the deal falls over because there was no clarity around a particular point of the deal.
And what's important about the mirror image rule is it perfectly connects to emotional labour, because as you slow it up, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here, and these are the 5 points. This is the opportunity in a negotiation to build emotional credits.
Yeah, it is. Emotional credit's a good term. What happens in negotiation is the agents get excited beyond belief. They've got blood rushing through their whole body. Their ears fill up with blood, and they often don't hear things. They just hear the price, for example, and they miss some of the detail. And then 3 days later, oh, no, I didn't agree to that. Yeah, I agree to that, but I want this. It's crazy. So in a perfect world, Lee, you teach people meditation or yoga so that when they got offers, they breathed a lot better, breathed deeply, slowed it all down, and got it all exactly correct at the start, so that I call them warts. You know, some of my staff have told me lately that there's all these warts all over deals, too many warts. All the deals are hard today. All the deals have always been hard. There's nothing changed except the internet has changed things. And how it's changed things in negotiation is buyers know more now. Like, what we don't understand is buyers know heaps more today than they did years ago. So when a buyer gives you the terms and conditions that they want to buy something, you know, they've been educated. They're better educated. So there's no more warts on a deal now than there ever has been. We just think there is. There's no difference today, really, except the buyer's got more tools and so on. And we've got to use the same effective processes, which is nail down all the terms and conditions, do a mirror image deal so the buyers and the sellers are on the same page. And then we've got to do the same thing. We've got to hold it together like a giant clamp between when someone says yes and exchanging a contract, or when it becomes unconditional. My view still is this. but the greatest agents I've ever seen are the best, not at negotiating the first stage of the deal, which is, yes, I want to buy it. My view is the greatest agents are the ones that hold it together between yes and an unconditional contract. And over all the time I was an agent and listing and selling property, there was many deals that I believe would have or could have fallen over, but I hung on to them. You know, I like super glued myself to the deal to make sure they went ahead.
And Chris, a technique that people need to bring into their game now, especially with so many deals on, is bullet point notes. With so many deals being done over the phone, meaning the purchasers ring you saying, look, I've thought about my offer, I want to do this, this and this. I think the mirror image rule here kicks in. And I even know myself of late, just in my notes part of my phone, with a headset on, someone will be talking to me and I'll just be typing in the bullet points of what they're saying so that when I go back to the other party, it's like, I took a few notes. Can I just discuss these with you to make sure everything's as you want it to be? But when you say to someone, I've taken a few notes, can I just go through them with you? They see you as a professional versus that agent off a current affair who could be doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, I've got an even more radical view. So I agree with what you said. I think the taking of notes is professional and other professions do it. Doctors do it, engineers, other professions do it. But I'll go further. You know, I believe you need a little book. When you use a pen, Lee, it slows down your thought processes. It slows them down to the point where you are really thinking about things as you're writing them down and other questions pop up. When you're typing, because your fingers are moving like they are and your eyes are running across the phone or the computer, I don't agree with that. I think people have totally got this wrong. When you write, there is a different thing goes on in your head to when you type. And there's books about it, there's articles you can read. So in my view, yes, it's fantastic to have the type notes, which is much better than no notes. Because none of us, you know how many pieces of information anybody can actually retain? 4, maybe 5 at any one time. That's it. But for most people, it's 3 or 4 tops. So if you've got some deal with 6 or 7 or 8 things there, you won't even remember them unless you tap them into a phone. But for me, if you really want to do a good deal and you really don't want it to be a thin ice deal, write them down, use a pen, because I can tell you by the time you get to the end of them, you'll have some questions or some things that you want to ask people which will add further detail. There can never be too much detail in a deal.
Chris, EQ empathy is something never discussed in our industry. Expand upon that.
We all understand that empathy means being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, which is a great thing. But what we don't understand that emotional intelligence, EQ, has upsides and downsides. For example, if you've got a lot of EQ, if you've got a lot of empathy, sometimes in a deal it gets in the way because you take somebody's side. And taking sides in a negotiation is a big mistake. So if you've got a lot of EQ, and I train people on EQ and talk about it all the time, it's a very, very important, to me, is more important than anything else in having great team members and giving people jobs. If someone's got good EQ, good empathy, we can train them and coach them to be a great salesperson. They're also usually givers. There's 2 types of people, Lee, givers or takers. In real estate, some real estate businesses are full of takers. Our business model is different. Ours is full of givers. And givers have high levels of emotional intelligence. But emotional intelligence, people who have empathy, people who are really good at understanding what other people are feeling and thinking, you just have to be careful if you're that sort of person that you don't join up and have too much empathy for one party or another and move across to their side of the table, because you often find that gets in the way, of negotiating a good deal.
Which connects perfectly to our next point, when to use the word no.
I think no and the word fair can be connected up here as well. Everyone wants to be thought of as fair, so sometimes you've got to say to people, no, or maybe that's not fair, or it's not fair. No is okay in negotiations, and it's hard to tell someone who's been in real estate for 6 weeks, you say no to an owner. But as most of us know over time, you do get, it's a power, the power of no. You learn that you can use the word no sometimes. No, I don't think we can do that. No, I don't think that's going to work. No, I don't think they're going to accept that. Now, that is something, it's not with age so much, but certainly as you get more experience. But no is incredibly important, and you need to judiciously, which means to use it where appropriate in a deal. And if you have trust, going back, if you've built trust, then people will listen to you. They might bristle up a little bit, but they'll very rarely tell you that you can't say that to them. So it's very effective, the word no. Negotiation is just about predictable surprises, and when you're new in the industry, you don't know that. But we know, we long-term practitioners, we know that if you do this, that will happen. You know, for example, sometimes that if you produce a low offer to somebody, that they're going to yell and scream at you. It's a predictable surprise. You know also that if you give a certain offer, that you'll probably get a counter offer. They're predictable surprises. You know, if you ask for longer settlement, that people are going to probably add it onto the price, because time is money in negotiation. They're all predictable surprises. I could write down a foolscap page full of them, give them to someone, and then go and discuss them in terms of training them about negotiation, and it'd be pretty clear. So real estate is full of predictable surprises.
I love the saying, time is money, and in reverse, money buys time. It's amazing how someone says, I can't move out till my daughter's exams are over. We'll give you 50 grand extra. She'll survive. And It's just that change. And Chris, one thing a lot of people don't know about your work is you've done some of the most complicated tenant negotiations when an owner wants to move back in, but there's a tenant there on a 3-year lease, and money and time really come into those two things in that style of negotiation as the only way forward.
It is, Lee. I did a negotiation a number of years ago when I was still on the tools. It took me 2 years. It was, for many years, the biggest and the largest sale in my area. Then it took 2 years. It was all of those things that you just mentioned. It was challenging. There was long periods of bristle in there and anger. There was long periods of silence. At the end of the day, going back to one of the early questions that you asked, and I'm not a patient person, I'm an impatient person naturally. So if you ask me, but I'm the most patient person in the world when it comes to a deal. And every deal's different. You know, real estate deals are like works of art. They're all totally different. And there's nothing the same about one deal to the next, but you have to be patient. You have to know when to push. You have to know when to step back. You have to know when to listen sometimes, and that means let someone vent. It's an art and a skill and a set of toil. You've got to do those three things. Sometimes the mix is different, but they're the three primary things you've got to do every time to get a deal together.
And Chris, this really stands clear when we talk about negotiating the agent's fee. Take us into your views on that part of a negotiation.
My staff will tell you, if you can't negotiate a good fee, you can't negotiate someone's house. So I say that in a negotiation I have for 30 years. If I can't negotiate a good and fair fee on my behalf, I'm not going to be any good to you, am I? Negotiating your fee is the most important negotiation you'll ever do, whether you're a salesman or whether you run a business. What you've got to do as the owner of a business is negotiate with your own staff all the time to make sure they're still getting their fees. So I agree with you, Lee. The fee's everything. If your business does what is happening around Australia and has done for the last decade, slides down a greasy pole where you get paid less and less for every deal, and if anyone can tell me we do less today than we used to 10 years ago, I'd like to see the evidence. We do so much more now. The level of training, professionalism, the data, the reports, all of the things is so much more. So why should we be paid less? So my view on fee negotiation is incredibly strong. All businesses, I call it keeping your pants up. You know, you keep dropping your pants time after time at listing presentations and getting less and less. To me, it's demeaning. Other professions don't do it. I don't understand why we would.
But if you're an agent right now who's consistently going down that greasy pole of low fees and you keep pumping it up on the ego side and better visuals in your listing presentation, it'd be better to flip the model, walk in and say, Chris, thanks for inviting me in. Can I ask you, what's attracted you to bring me in to have a look at your property?
Yeah, why did you bring me in? Lee, of all the words that an agent needs to use every day, why is the most important? You know, why didn't they accept the offer? Why did they give it to the other company? Why? So, yes, it's absolutely the case. Why did you bring me in? Why don't you want to pay me that? You know me very well because we've done a lot of work over the years. I'm a very direct person. And over the years, all I can say to anyone listening out there is there's nothing wrong with being direct. You can ask sellers all the time why. Use the why word all the time. You won't find out anything unless you ask people, why won't you take that offer? Why won't you accept that offer? Why don't you like those terms and conditions? Just use the why word all the time and you can't go wrong. Because when you start out, it's the only word you can use because you don't know anything, Lee. So you might as well just keep asking why. Why do you do it that way?
And I love when people say, Lee, I just want to let you know the other agents offered me free marketing and 1.8%. Is there any reason why you haven't appointed them?
Yeah, that's a great thing.
Chris, my final question for you, and this has been a tremendous little session of advanced negotiation. You've read many, many books. What book had the most impact on you for the topic of negotiation based on your knowledge now?
It's a very good question, Lee. The book that had the most influence on me about negotiation was probably the book called Start With Why. Start With Why by Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. But it's not necessarily a book about negotiation, but it's a book about my favourite topic. And my favourite topic, Lee, is asking questions. And if you asked me what my career had been, I actually don't and haven't had a career in real estate. I've had a career in curiosity. And my career in curiosity comes from my desire to always be finding out things and starting with the why word is what I've done my whole career. And through being able to ask questions, I've built trust, I think, and that's helped me in many aspects of my life, but particularly with negotiation.
So true. And for the record, mine was getting to yes. I really enjoyed, there was just one question in that book I loved. What's the situation now and what would you like it to be? But under explore, it just hits the groove beautifully. Chris Hanley, thank you for joining us.
See you, Lee.
And that concludes today's Advance podcast on negotiation. For those of you joining us at the Complete Salesperson course or the Complete Leader Conference, I look forward to seeing you there. I'm Lee Woodward. Till next week, goodbye.